think it's so vital that we really enter those conspiracy worlds, often full of hate and mistruths, and understand the people who are the true believers, the people who are the followers of these movements. And that can come with some risks. Often these movements are quite hostile, but on the whole, I've found them to be a really sort of positive way of understanding more and ultimately applying the principles of investigative journalism to that social media world, the same ones that a lot of people have spoken about today. I think that there's one example that really stays with me. A woman called Alicia who lives in Wales, and she followed someone who we're going to talk about next, I think, a man called Richard D. Hall, and she was consuming his content, including content suggesting that the Manchester Arena bombing had been staged or fabricated in some way. And I interviewed her for a Panorama investigation, Disaster Deniers Hunting the Trolls, and a Radio 4 podcast series of the same name. And she welcomed me into her home and we started talking. And I often find the most important thing is to understand not what people believe so much as why they believe it. Mm-hmm. And for her, she had found the pandemic very difficult. She'd lost her mum. It had been a really anxious time. She was finding the cost of living crisis even more difficult. And she'd turned to this place as a kind of a place for answers. She found it really quite terrifying, and that had gripped her. She was using social media as the gateway to this world. Mm-hmm. And so she'd found herself consuming these kinds of conspiracy theories that actually, when I kind of confronted her, she said, oh, hang on a second, maybe I've gone too far. And I spoke to her about the survivors and the victims. And in some ways, that was quite a hopeful encounter, because I left thinking that actually perhaps her views weren't so deeply held as we might think, and that actually some of the people who are the true believers who've been exploited or misled, that there is hope if we can actually expose to them how these tactics work and how the leaders of these movements are misleading them.